thought I'd shock you, Mick. Mick, I bought this shirt.
Welcome to the show. People are storming the studio. We've got fans outside. I've got security. We've got, yes, ladies and gentlemen, Indiana Jones has graced the show today.
Mick, I'm telling you now, I've just come off bloody holiday. You know what holiday means? It's, we went down to a place called Tampa. Have you heard of Tampa?
I have heard of Tampa, yes.
I mean, it's only the elite, only the absolute elite goes to Tampa, and I was one of them. I was chosen by the mayor of Tampa to come and visit.
So you had a good time. You got yourself all pink and rosy. I see you.
Man, I'll tell you what, I lay in that water like a friggin' whale. It was absolutely too beautiful. And but anyway, so it was quite an experience. And yeah, so you like the hat, and I had a hat.
Like the hat. I'm glad I wasn't there to see the whole whale experience. But
no, that was not pretty. But you know what? I don't give a damn. And trust me, I was not the only whale in that water. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that gave me a little bit of, sort of like it's okay. You know what I mean?
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah. So and even with the hat, I got as red as a turkey. So that's the experience, and loved it. Got to do it more often, and. It's always good. Big recommendation. First, look, here's how we can create value. First thing, hey guys, go on bloody holiday. There you are. I mean, isn't that a good recommendation?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, we flooring by the numbers, we think, businesses need to do three things, right? Number one, make profit, make money. Number two, right, generate cash. Number three, Andre, is what?
Create wealth.
And what's our definition of wealth?
So that others do more, and Mick, you as the owner and the management team do less. In other words, you spend more time on the business and go on damn holiday. There you are.
Exactly right. All right. So turning our attention to creating wealth in the business, here's our title slide. It was about talking about working capital today, and the reason we wanted to talk about working capital is, in a commercial flooring business, it can represent, 80%, of your total balance sheet. So pretty important. And I know you're focused on it, but, here we're going to give you some, maybe one or two little insights that you can go away with, and you can tweak your balance sheet, focus on some key things, and help you grow and generate more cash in your business. So we're gonna get into it, and I got to warn you, we're going to get into a few numbers, flooring by the numbers. So we're going to get into a few numbers today. So if you've got a bigger screen, that will help. We'll try and make it as clear as possible. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this, video in the replay, and you've got any questions about it, we're more than happy to bring those numbers to life for you. So we're going to try and make it as easy as possible. What that means is, if I can understand it, means you can understand it. So, so we have one slide.
That's all right. We'll right. Hopefully.
Right.
But, the minute you start bringing numbers in, hey, Mick, it really does create a degree of complexity. And one of the things, that you and I were talking about a little earlier on is, people shy away from bringing numbers into play, because a number is something real, all right? So automatically that exposes you. You know what I mean? You can screw it up, you can say the wrong thing, and automatically that can create a little bit of tension. And we're okay with that. You know what I mean? We love people to say, well, we agree, we don't agree, whatever the case may be. But once we get sort of comfortable with the numbers, we start seeing things differently, and so we like to bring in the numbers and use that.
Yeah, what I like, Andre, and we've seen this many, many times. So we've touched and worked with over 60 commercial flooring companies, but we've been really, really deep in probably about 20 of them. And what we see in the life cycle of us working with the companies, when we first start working, there's a lot of strong, opinion, a lot of intuition. The businesses have been very, very successful. The owners are very, very passionate, and the debate is often has strong talking points, strong opinions, strong intuitions. And once we start getting a little bit more comfortable with the numbers, we start having a little bit more rigid discussions around the data, and they tend to be more objective, and it allows us to navigate sometimes some very highly charged emotional issues like, well, this part of the business has always done well for us and this new part doesn't. And when we see the numbers and they paint a different picture, it allows us to have a very objective discussion. So we love the numbers. The numbers set you free, and they complement the creative and intuitive intellect and gut decisions that have got you to where we are. So we love the numbers. Just a little smattering will really make a big difference. So I'm just going to go through a few of them today. We've got one simple slide, Andre, that I'll share here. Let's see how I can. Oh, I know how to do that. Yes, we go like that, as if by magic. The power of my studio team in the background have advanced the slides forward. So a little bit of a description of working capital, Andre.
Hey, mate, listen here. I got a problem here.
You've
got a studio team. And trust me, I know you do have where you are, and one day we'll share our studio with the audience. Which
look, you've got a wardrobe team. I mean, somebody must have dressed you today.
Look, man, when it comes to dressing me, nobody gets involved. Only me, because I know exactly all the components that are required.
A beautiful ensemble.
Yeah, it's absolutely it. And I look in the mirror and I say, bloody perfect. So Mick,
right.
let's talk a little more about this. And here's. I mean, I love what you said, and it is so true. And often, Mick, what we're going to find is when we start talking about the numbers per se, it's really good to get some foundations. And working capital does not work on its own. It is very strongly influenced by the way we manage our income statement. So there is a complement between a working capital element and a revenue element. So, but before we get into that, let's just look at the definition of working capital, because this is where most people sort of have very different definitions. The people talk about current assets minus current liabilities is equal to working capital. Not really. Working capital is a very pure metric. It is how much is our receivables? In other words, how much does our customers owe us, or do our customers owe us? Sorry for the English. Plus our inventories and our underbillings, less our accounts payable, is equal to working capital. Now, guys, here's the big thing. Notice what we said there is inventory plus underbillings. Now, there's two approaches here. The one approach is that we put inventory plus underbillings and keep underbillings as a gross metric. The second approach is we show net under overbillings. So and either way is good. It's fine, no problem. I mean, I have a preference of showing just the gross underbillings, and there's very good reason for that. But if you want to show your net under overbillings inside your inventory number, that is absolutely fine, with the condition that it's consistent.
Right.
So you always treat it consistently, whichever way you're looking at your trend. Month 1, month 2, month 3, year 1, year 2, year 3. It's always a consistent way of treating it, right? And once again, my preference is showing gross underbillings, Mick. And what we've noticed is when you segment, the components, the number starts looking different. It starts telling you a different story, doesn't it, hey, Mick?
And you look, we don't just put the numbers up just for the sake of putting the numbers up. What we're wanting to do is to be able to make some decisions to operate our business more effectively on the basis of those numbers. And I'm with Andre. When you separate out the underbillings, overbillings, it gives you some obvious actions and strategies that you can take to move those in a better direction. And if you start seeing a trend with those going in the wrong direction, you get an early warning signal and you can start to adapt to that. Whereas if you bundle everything together, it might take you a little bit longer to puzzle that out.
Right. So, guys, if you look at the interaction, so what we said in the beginning is working capital does not operate on its own. Isn't that correct, Mick?
Right. Okay. And if you look at this diagram, on the left-hand side, those elements of working capital sit in the balance sheet, and the elements on the right-hand side sit in your income statement. You would recognize your income statement as my revenues less my cost of goods sold gives me my gross profit. So you've got the kind of balance sheet and the income statement, but working capital does not exist independently, right? The balance sheet and the income statement are integrated. They're not separate entities. And when I first started working with Andre, his ability to educate me in how the income statement and balance sheet, work together was really quite revealing. So I'll give you a compliment there, even though
thank you, Mick. I thought you were going to compliment me on my hat. Mick, this hat cost me about, I think it was like a lot of money. I can't remember. But
it was probably cheaper than a good haircut. So I would leave it on.
And so Mick, now we starting to get a feel. When revenue changes, right, receivables change. When our cost of goods sold change, as our cost of goods sold are changing, because we're purchasing more, all of those dynamics, our balance sheet items of inventory and overbillings and accounts payable, they always, so working capital is very dynamic. It's virtually changes daily, So with each transaction, your income statement, your balance sheet is continuously changing, right? And so therefore it makes this a little bit difficult to manage, as a one-off type environment, and one of the things.
That's why we like to talk about the three characters, our characters, vanity, sanity, and king. And we'll talk a little bit about how they interplay, because their natural interaction will really change that working capital element. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Right. And guys, when you look at this, your accounts receivable and income statement equivalent revenue. So revenue does drive a significant way that your working capital behaves. It, of course, is not the only driver. It's the way that your cost of goods sold behaves as well. But revenue ultimately drives cost of goods sold and ultimately drives your gross profit. So when we look at revenue, hey, Mick, it's the mix of our revenue that can significantly not only change our profitability, but also change the behavior of our working capital.
Correct. And our expression, we pretty much say it every week: revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. So in this environment, our team vanity, who is generating that revenue, they can generate different types of revenue, different types of mix, different types of revenue quality. So if they're finding customers who pay more quickly, that would reduce our receivables. So, we talk about the difference between, bidding big contracts and end user work. Different types of revenue, the time the speed at which you get paid by an end user, very, very different if you're working with a general contractor, right?
Right, Mick. Not only is that end user pays you quicker, but invariably you don't have any retainage. So
Right.
so you know your the not only is just, and we'll talk a little bit about that component in receivables that people forget about so often, which is really that unbilled retainage that is sitting inside those receivables that changes the dynamics of those receivables tremendously. So and if you don't bill it, you can't collect it. So that's the obvious issue around that. So if somebody says to you, hey, Mac, I want to reduce my receivables from my current 80 days to 30 days. Hey, we could do that for you very easily. Just, sell 100% of your business to end users.
Yep.
And then they can say, oh, I don't like that answer, do I? Why? Because that's hard work. And yes, it is, and that's why we are very, very, focused on having a good component, a healthy component of end user work, because we know what this does to both our income statement and our balance sheet, and we also have seen what happens when that mix suddenly changes significantly. Hey, Mick, when suddenly we are, weight our business far more strongly on let's call it the GC type work. Not that there's anything wrong with GC work, but it does change the nature of our financial statements. So So when we look at that, we always look at the revenue mix. And I'll tell you one thing now, Mick, guaranteed. Here's a guarantee. When our receivables change from let's call it, the metric around our receivables, of course, is average collection period in days. So how many days do we collect our receivables? Mm-hmm. When those days change, inevitably, two things are happening. The customer mix is changing, right? Most probably one thing is the customer mix, or there's something in our process that's changed. Okay, that could also influence it. So remember, when we look at what are the 4 Ps, Mick?
Oh, you're going to test me now. So we're going to, we're looking at our people, our portfolio, our process, and performance management. Right.
So you see, when you just look at those 2 components, revenue and receivables, you got the portfolio issue and process, because process often what we notice is our receivable days have changed, and what's happened is just the person who's used to run the receivables is either left or moved on or whatever the case is, and suddenly the whole way that we traditionally do things has changed, and that's completely changed the dynamics of our working capital. And this is so important that we the way that we run our business in relation to how our income statement behaves and our balance sheet behaves. So Mick, what we can do now is just try and give people a little bit of context with some numbers, and I'd love to I'd love to be able to share my screen. Is that okay, Mick?
When you get to the right page, have you got your screen up on there?
Yes, I'm good. Everything's good. If I share, so
there it is. There it is. Yep.
Can you see my screen?
Let me make it bigger. I know people are going to write in and complain that I can't see Andre's hat, but I'm going to make it bigger so you'll just hear our voices while we make this a little bigger on the screen.
Yeah, I know, and I know we always try and minimize the number of numbers. So number of numbers smaller, less is better, all those good things. But if you think about it, our traditional sort of flooring business, let's say a $20 million business, and that $20 million is delivered around about 22%. And after we paid commissions, what we call our marginal income, or gross profit minus commissions, that sort of contribution element. So that is let's call it our variable income that we get. less all of our fixed costs that that we talk about so often gives us our operating profit. Okay, so and Mick, here's the thing, which is often very helpful for specifically when it comes to some salespeople, and I think there's been a component of more education around there. But many salespeople say if it's not a job cost, it's what?
It's not a cost.
So when salespeople look at things, what do they look at? They look at that cost there. They're saying, well, if those are the costs that really are important. Okay, but the reality is that the business has to make a net profit. So that's just by the side. So, often this component of cost is just completely ignored. It doesn't exist from there, but hey, it's real, So, you guys, that's one thing. That belief system of if it's not a job cost, it's not a cost is something very dangerous in our business. But at the end of the day, we're making 4 cents net profit or $800,000 on a $20 million business. Fairly standard.
Yeah, that would be standard, Andre, wouldn't it? I mean,
very. This would be pretty much, in a normal conditions, non-COVID, whatever. That is a fairly, Now, here's the nice part about that, and I promise you, I'm not going to spend a lot, but you'll see when we have a $10 million business, it looks very different. The minute we go from a $10 million to a $20 million business, this number changes significantly.
Right.
So you have a look at the metamorphosis or your business life cycle. Is if you've got your $20 million business today and you look back at the days when you had $10 million and you say, geez, look how much money I made. But the reality is that the infrastructure does change, and over time, as we scale the business, and this is the most important point, as we scale the business, that's when we really can make, good profit out of the additional revenue. So this is the sort of profile of our business. Now, when we look at that business, what does that business do? That business drives a component of working capital. Remember, our receivables plus our inventories and underbillings minus our payables, or what we owe our vendors, is equal to a number, right? So 4.3 plus 1.5 minus 1.2 is equal to $4.6 million worth of working capital. So, and that is very, very typical, roughly. So the mix of receivables, underbillings, etc., they might change a little bit between one company
and Andre, I know you talked about this in the pre-show. The receivables number is one of the biggest on the balance sheet, isn't it?
Right. Yes. It of course it is, and so should it be. If we are a traditional commercial floor contractor that does mix of business. Now, the couple of things that we do have is, if we think about that number, that accounts receivable number, in many cases, or in most traditional cases, that comprises, billed and unbilled amounts. So the unbilled amounts is usually the unbilled retainage amount. So it's still sitting in our receivables, but it's not yet billed. And what I like to see in most balance sheets, right? I like to see the breakdown between what is billed and what's unbilled. And you look at the relationship between your billed and unbilled, and making sure that relationship either is improving or or at least staying the same. I mean,
right.
That's
not getting worse.
You're right. It's not getting worse. Thank you for your help there. Thank you for your patience. Nice. Okay, so that's point number one. When we look at our receivables, what is the component of billed versus unbilled? And we also take a metric of measuring our days in relation to billed and unbilled. So I like looking at the purity of that. But for the moment, and trying to keep this as sort of as simple as possible, we are looking at one number which normally comprises both elements of billed and unbilled. Then we look at our inventory and our underbillings. Right now, in most of our situations, is that inventory is very, very low. It's a very small in most cases. So traditionally, that number is really primarily driven by underbillings. Okay, and then of course our payable days is just total vendors divided by our cost of goods sold and multiplied by the number of days in the period. So that gives us our relationship of how our working capital behaves. However, the one metric, Mick, that very few, well, in fact, I've never seen any commercial flooring company use this other than, after we've been working with them. And that metric is our working capital divided by revenue. So we call that the working capital retention ratio.
We have another name for it as well, don't we? We call it the hunger measure.
Aha! Love it.
Because the bigger that number, the bigger that number, the more hungry the balance sheet is for working capital. So we've always want that balance sheet to be a lean, mean balance sheet machine. So we like that hunger measure to be as low as possible. We want to put your balance sheet on a diet so that we use our working capital as efficiently as possible. So we like the term hunger measure or working capital retention. Yes. One of my favorites.
Nice. I love that, Mick. Yes. Thank you for. So, Mick, now that we got this hunger measure, this working capital retention, remember, guys, very, very simple but really powerful metric. We take working capital divided by our revenue. As simple as that. Now, if your revenue is not for a full year, you have to adjust. You have to equalize. Because remember, working capital is ongoing. So you then have to, gross up your revenue for a year.
TMI, Andre. You sound like an accountant now. No,
okay. Too much information. Lovely. Yep. Thank you, Mick. Thank you. Okay, keep me on track. So now, Mick, now that we know our retention metric, right? We have a way. Remember, we are trying to balance the behavior of our income statement with our balance sheet. We now have a way to compare that what is our income statement producing versus our balance sheet consuming. So for every additional dollar, if our balance sheet consumes 23 cents and our income statement is generating 16 cents, what do you think is the consequence?
Aha. Even I know this one, Andre.
Okay, explain to us, please. If you can explain it to us, obviously that makes it just so much more powerful.
Yeah. So our vanity and sanity team are doing a great job generating that 16 cents of profitability at the contribution level. But over on the balance sheet, the king's scratching his head a little bit because the balance sheet wants, for every dollar of revenue, I need 23 cents of working capital funding. So what that means, that difference, that 7 cents difference, is when we grow, for every dollar of growth, I'm going to have another 7 cents of working capital. So what it means is my business will consume cash when it grows.
Aha!
Did I do well? Did I do well?
Fantastic. So beautiful. Yeah, so automatically, and two very simple metrics, hey, Mick. I mean, this is as easy to calculate as you wish, and this is as easy to calculate. These are things that we have, or we either have or we should have on our fingertips, at least on a monthly basis, right? So when two things, not only are we noticing, the gap, you're talking about, remember, what did you say? It's that roughly 7 cents gap, right? Yep. But also what we start seeing is, okay, now how do we close that gap, right? We have two very clear strategies available to us to close the gap. And really that gap ultimately, Mick, should represent opportunity. Isn't that right?
Yep.
Because I mean with the right strategies, in theory, we can if we choose to close it, we have two ways to do so. And the one way is the income statement management way, and the other way is the balance sheet way. Now, Mick, when you were talking about this gap, the nice part about that is, remember, why is it really a true metric? Because you are comparing the variable component. In other words, the component that changes with revenue inside your income statement with the variable component, the component that changes with revenue inside your balance sheet. So that's why it's a very pure metric. Both are totally driven by changes of revenue.
Right.
So you start seeing how important the quality of revenue can be on both areas. Now that you know that, you can say, okay, well, what do I need to do from an income statement management if I want to do more of this? And then what do I need to do from a balance sheet management if I want to do less of this?
And this, for those of you who watched last week's show on ROCE, which was return on capital employed, we had a long discussion about, improving ROCE was doing more of this, which was on the income statement side, with less of this on the balance sheet side. And now we've isolated, smaller components of that, doing more of, contribution with less working capital is in the same strategic, framework. So you might want to go back and watch last week's. It was a really good overview of ROCE.
Right. So now we get the situation right where we can easily understand the first thing. Are we cash absorbing when we grow, or are we cash generating when we grow? Now, I mean, obviously, Mick, most of us, the first thing we want to know is, are we absorbing or generating? If we're in a generating type environment, okay, already that gives us a little bit of comfort that if we choose to grow, cash is not going to be a big issue. However, if we are in an absorbing environment, if we choose to grow, we know we may have to have a discussion with our bank manager, because this is now where we start introducing the concept of, working capital funding. So in order to help us with that, Mick, are we good so far? Can I move to the working capital funding requirement?
Yes, no, I think that is an important one, because a lot of businesses, are starting to grow again, and thinking about how we finance that, how we get the cash, the funding. What the bank wants to know: is that good funding? Is it going to good purposes? And I know you're going to educate us here, Andre.
Right. So the banks, if of course, there's many other considerations, but what they feel comfortable with, let's rather say, they feel comfortable with funding working capital. What they don't feel comfortable with is funding working capital wastage. So that's the thing they don't feel comfortable with. And let me explain what that means. So now let's expand this a little bit, Mick, and let's go to the second year. All right. So we can see what happens, when we move from where we are today to the future. So that's all. And remember, Mick, we're always trying to look at the future. So we're always trying to create ways to predict and see impact around that prediction. So, for example, if we move into the future here, we notice that our business has grown, or it's either planned growth or actual growth. Doesn't really matter. But our business has grown from $20 million to $25 million, right? And in this case, our margins have stayed very consistent. And even the way that our compensation for sales is very consistent. And, and our fixed costs even have increased slightly, and we're still getting 4% worth of contribution. So really just looking at it, at that growth being just basically, a very consistent type of growth metric. And we even allowing for some additional cost in order to deliver the infrastructure for that additional revenue. So right. All of that is good. Now, the one thing we notice is when it comes to our working capital, we also saying exactly the same behavior that we've projected in our income statement is translated to our working capital. So we're saying, well, next year, if we do $25 million worth of revenue and we keep our receivables very consistent, so we're just selling more to the same portfolio of customers and they behave the same, right? Now we notice that, well, instead of our receivables, the amount that our customers owe us last year was $4.3 million. That's going to grow to about $5.4 million if our days stay the same. So what that tells us is, hey guys, we're going to need some funding here. Somewhere we're going to need some funding. And in terms of our underbillings stays exactly the same at 35 days, which says, okay, based on a $25 million business, instead of needing $1.5 million of underbillings, we now need $1.8 million of underbillings. And our vendors support us a little bit better versus, the vendor relief that we get previously was $1.3 million. Versus now on a $25 million is $1.6 million. So you now notice that the balance sheet is saying to us, previously, I needed $4.6 million worth of working capital funding. Today, I need $5.7 odd million. Now, that is a consumption of cash, Mick. That's what it is, right? That requires funding, okay? So now I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. If we go to our cash flow statement in year 2, the income statement produces $1 million of profit, and the balance sheet consumes $1.1 million of cash. So that's cash, net cash flow, or put it this way, net operational cash flow, negative $149,000. So you see, there is the increase in our working capital. That's where we see the requirement from our balance sheet. There is our profit. That is the contribution from our income statement. That is the net cash that we require in order to grow by $5 million. So what our banks love to do, Mick, is they love to fund that additional $150,000. Not love, I mean but they're comfortable with funding it because that's the requirement for growth. You with me?
Yeah, and the risk is not increased. They're happy to lend you that money. It's all good.
Right. But then what happens is something like this, that, for some reason, hey, Mick, our customer mix is changing, our process has changed, something has happened, and this becomes 90, and that becomes 40. What do you think? What do you think the requirement is now? $1.1 million.
Yeah, it jumped from $149,000 to over $1 million.
So Mick, not and really not that significant from a day's viewpoint. All this said is my receivable days have grown by 10 days, and my underbillings days have grown by 5 days. And Mick, we see this day in, day out, traditionally driven by a change in customer.
And this is like the boiling frog analogy. You put a frog in a beaker, and it sits there in the cold water, and you put a Bunsen burner under there, and the temperature starts going up and up, and the frog doesn't really notice that the temperature is going up that much. It just sits there over time till it dies, because it gets boiled. And sometimes we don't see that receivable days creeping up. It just ticks up, week after week. It's very insidious, and all of a sudden we get this impact that really is quite concerning, particularly from the bank manager, because you're going to introduce us to the concept of wastage here, Andre, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly right, Mick, because what the bank manager said is, I'm comfortable with the additional $150,000. No problem. I understand your business. I've seen your business perform under these key environments, this structure, and I'm fine with it. And then suddenly, what we really need is $1.1 million, not $150,000. $1.1 million becomes a requirement. And really, what's happened in our business, Mick, is that we've created this measure called working capital wastage. And all this is really how much working capital do you really need versus the way that you've managed your business. No improvement, okay, no improvement, but based on the way that you've managed your business, you really needed $5.7 million worth of working capital. Versus,
and wastage is a kind. It's a kind term. We sometimes get a little bit more aggressive in describing it because we want to stimulate a reaction. Sometimes it's an angry reaction, but nevertheless, the other way that we describe it is, management inefficiency, because working capital is totally at the management discretion of the organization. It's down to you to manage that. So you need to manage what Vanity is doing in terms of the mix of revenue that's coming in. You have to manage your receivable process. You have to manage your unbilled, retainage. It's all management. It's all management. Actually, it's all within the daily control of your team. So actually knowing these numbers allows them on a day. This is a daily type of activity, right, Andre?
Yeah, I mean, it is, Mick. And then, the reality is that often the way that you truly have to manage this is in your pipeline. You've got to go to the most forward-looking things. What are you bidding? Is what you're bidding, is that fundamentally going to change going forward? And we see this happening so often. And then, and like you said, often we try and create a little bit of urgency around that. And, we use the word management inefficiency, but that's what it is, because, we get so tied up with that additional growth, that additional this, and we start seeing how, this impacts our business. And then what happens is we become very reactionary, don't we, Mick? Because the bank says, hey, I don't want to fund that $952,000. That's not called working capital funding. That's just pure because you've changed the way that your working capital behaves. I don't want to change that. You've increased the risk completely. I'm fine with that $150,000. I'm not fine with the $952,000.
Right. So what can we do to change that? What are we advocating for our viewers here?
Right. So, okay, let's finish this off. So, Mick, the first thing is, number one, is to have these metrics and at least look at your working capital retention and your marginal income retention generation. Have that available. Make sure that you are always looking at at how that's behaving. So that is the most important. Secondly, the next thing is, please look at bad work. It's the quality of work that you allow in your business not only will significantly impact your income statement, but it has even a more dramatic impact on your working capital. So, keep bad work away. Mick, we spoke about this in our last thing. We even had a great little graphic. If you wish, have a look at the little graphic, that there is an area, there's a hot spot. There's a blind spot that we land up, doing that type of work, and we shouldn't be doing that work. And it always happens. So that's the second thing.
So Andre, just to come back to the P's, the portfolio, making sure that you've got the right kind of mix in your portfolio. So those high risk, low margin jobs that can turn, into bad jobs, we want to make sure that we weed those out over time. So how we go to market, how we select our target customers, how we educate them in our business practices in terms of collections, and how we manage retainage with those people. Very, very important. But as you said, Andre, the working capital and cash is a lagging indicator. The leading indicators is, what are we putting into the pipeline in the first place?
Yep. There you are. And I think, and really we would like one thing, and that is, don't get reactive, because the minute you get reactive, then, everything really becomes very difficult. The more proactive we can be, the more we are looking at, the way that our pipeline and our backlog is behaving, really has a significant impact on our financials.
And one thing that we haven't talked about in this show, Andre, but one of the things that our clients love is, if you can improve. We've shown a deterioration in this model of our working capital retention, but if we can improve that working capital retention, as Andre is magically doing, he's a genius. He's a wizard. He's a wizard. Look at that. We've generated nearly a positive $1 million. You know what you can do with that, guys? You can pay down that debt.
Hey, you can go on holiday, Mick.
Yeah. Buy a new hat.
Right. So, and Mick, these are things that buy a new hat. Oh, I love it. Yeah. And you can see, Mick, that suddenly we have moved our working capital very close to our marginal income contribution, and look at the outcome of this. There's $952,000 of benefit that we are releasing working capital that we've previously had to have. This is what we previously had to have is completely coming into our financials. There is now the working capital retention, $197,000. That's based on the fact that we have now improved this so significantly. Remember previously when we were at our what was it? It was the 80-35. Yeah. There you are. We needed $150,000. Working capital there was $1.1 million impact.
Right.
And this is what we do. We go in and we say, okay, look at your working capital. It's still negative. It's still negative, Nick. But why? Because that's 16 and that's 19. So this is still negative. But it's a hell of a, what a big difference.
Yeah.
From $1 million to $200,000.
Right. And when we work with our clients, we like to calculate, what does 1 day of receivables movement, equal, and actually knowing what that number is, the power of 1 day receivable movement, 1 day underbillings movement, 1 day payables movement, and show the impact that can have on your cash position.
Yep. So there it's $271,000. Remember, it used to be, it used to be, so that 1 day is $121,000.
Yeah. I mean, wow, that's a lot of money, isn't it? I wish I had that in my pocket. One day, and here's the other thing that we do when we're working with our clients. We look at that working capital behavior over time. And we'll see there are periods of excellence where those numbers are in a much better position than they are today. And so it causes us to ask the question, what were the conditions that existed to drive that behavior? And it may be we were more diligent about our collections, but it was probably about, what kind of, we were thoughtfully or accidentally, we attracted the right kind of clients who paid much more quickly, or had less retainage, so how can we create those conditions again? Because what you did it once, right? You already demonstrated that behavior. So all we want to do is to identify what created it, and you've already done this. So it's not like re-engineering your organization. We just wanted you to be at your best more often and we can get this kind of, improvement in both your income statement and your balance sheet, and it will fundamentally change your cash position.
Yeah, I mean, Mick, we call that best achieved, don't we? So, let's just get to best achieved, and then we try and work, those other strategies to improve upon that. And normally best achieved has a significant impact on the financials. So, and the nice part about best achieved is nobody can tell you that it's not possible.
Right. Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about best achieved. All right, Mick. So I think that's that's maybe a wrap for today.
Yes.
But one of the things, guys, when we go through what we call your business health test, these are the things that we look at. And this is one of the ways that we extract the potential benefit that you can have with a different discipline within your organization. So just to give you a little bit of a preview around that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Andre, because you and I were talking, and what we want to be able to do is we're going to put together a little webinar where we're going to show you how we identify opportunity in your business, and so you can see how we do that, and that will give you some ideas. But also, we do run this analytic, we call it the business health test, where we dive into your numbers, and we'll show you where significant opportunity exists within your business. But you'll see how we do it on the webinar. So we'll send you a link to that. We'll do that. We'll show you that, and I think you'll find it really insightful. How you can yourselves find opportunity in the business. So looking forward to that one. All right, Andre. So another show. Hopefully, we brought the dry subject of working capital into an exciting competitive weapon you can use in your arsenal to drive, cash accretive growth in your business. So I enjoyed being with you. I even enjoyed looking at Andre's hat. So it's goodbye from me.
And all the best from me. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.